Did Chris Rock just call Meghan Markle a yacht BTCH asterisk, live and censored, and in front of the most elite room in Hollywood? That's not a headline. That's a transcript. And the moment it left his lips, the Gotham Film Awards transformed from a glitzy celebration of indie cinema into something else entirely. Something raw, something uncomfortable, something unforgettable. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The air shifted, laughter caught in throats. Faces twisted into shocked half-smiles, half-cringes. Phones were yanked out of clutch purses and tuxedo pockets. Social media didn't wait for the next punchline. It detonated. But this wasn't just a joke. It was a surgical strike, a barb dipped in decades of resentment. A truth, ugly or exaggerated, depending on who you ask, that had lingered in whispers, never dared said on stage. Until now. Because Chris Rock, yes, that Chris Rock, didn't just torch Meghan Markle's public persona. He scorched the very scaffolding it was built upon. Carefully managed PR, weaponized victimhood, and that elusive, shape-shifting narrative she's clung to since stepping into the royal spotlight. This was no roasting. It was a reckoning, and it caught everyone off guard. Everyone, that is, except for the handful of Hollywood insiders who knew this moment was coming. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not on that stage. But somewhere. Eventually. Because the whispers about Meghan Markle have been getting louder. The patience thinner. The smiles faker. And in an industry built on illusion, the illusion of Meghan is starting to crack. But let's rewind for just a moment. Let's go back to that night. It's November 2025. The Gotham Film Awards, a prestigious, almost too serious affair that prides itself on highlighting artistic grit over glitzy blockbusters, has managed to gather some of the most powerful creatives in one room. Think Kate Blanchett sipping champagne near a marble bar. Think Adam Driver nodding politely during a 3-minute French film clip. Think Greta Gerwig in a sequin pantsuit, fending off questions about Barbie 2. And then, she arrives. Meghan Markle. Not as an honoree, not as a presenter, not as a filmmaker, but as what exactly? The tension is immediate. Cameras flash like lightning. Paparazzi pivot. A few heads turn. Others roll their eyes discreetly. She's dressed to be seen. An emerald satin gown hugging her figure, diamond earrings catching every glint of stage light. Prince Harry, noticeably absent. Again, this isn't the royal version of Meghan, nor the with love, Meghan lifestyle entrepreneur, nor the Netflix producer. This is Meghan the brand. And make no mistake, her brand needs a win. Let's not pretend 2025 has been kind to her. Between the brutal backlash over her now-paused lifestyle brand, as ever, the embarrassing quiet exit from Spotify's podcast lineup, and growing murmurs of strained relationships with former allies like Oprah, the tide has shifted. The fairy tale is fraying. People are asking questions, real ones, about timelines, about authenticity, about intent, and whether the Meghan we see, poised, polished, ever composed, isn't just another performance in a long string of calculated reinventions. Which brings us to the Gotham Awards stage, and to the man holding the mic, Chris Rock. You probably remember the slap. Everyone does. But what you may not remember is what happened after. The way Chris leaned into his role as a truth-teller. The way he started carving a new comedic path, less about family-friendly observations, more about brutal honesty. After the Oscars, Chris Rock stopped pulling punches. He made a choice. A career shift, if you will. He would rather risk being hated for telling the truth than loved for dancing around it. And tonight, that choice landed him squarely in Meghan Markle's orbit. Or maybe it's more accurate to say, in her crosshairs. Because what started as a casual joke about indie filmmakers and egos took a sudden left turn. A shift in tone. A deliberate pause. Then came the line. No stutter. No hesitation. You know Meghan was on more yachts than champagne. The room froze. Then, he added. She didn't marry a prince. She upgraded her client. Gasps. Stifled laughs. A few dropped forks. Phones, once hidden, lit up like fireflies in a summer field. A handful of attendees looked straight at Meghan, whose face, if you believed lip readers online, moved from tight smile to dead stare in seconds. Now here's the thing. This wasn't a throwaway line. This wasn't improvised. This had intention. Because Chris Rock knows the power of words. And when he invoked that particular insult, a phrase so loaded, so coded, so steeped in tabloid lore, it wasn't just about being edgy. It was about exposing something Hollywood has tiptoed around for years. The so-called yacht girl rumors. The idea that before Meghan was a duchess, before she was an actress even, she was part of an elite world of beautiful women flown to private islands, parties, and yes, luxury yachts, where introductions to powerful men were made in candlelight, not casting rooms. Rumor? Tabloid fiction? Misogynistic smear? Maybe. But when Chris Rock gave that rumor stage time, broadcasted it under golden lights, in front of 100 cameras and thousands of viewers, he did more than provoke. He validated the whispers. And whether you believe it's true or not, in Hollywood, perception is reality. That's why this moment mattered. Not just because it was savage, or funny, or jaw-droppingly inappropriate, but because it cracked the mirror. It revealed the widening divide between what Meghan wants the public to see and what some believe is lurking behind the curtain. And let's be clear, this isn't just about one joke. This is about years of tension, accumulated resentment, the sense among A-listers that Meghan Markle is not one of them, despite her desperate attempts to be. There are no Emmys, no box office hits, no Gotham-eligible scripts, just drama. And drama, for all its gossip value, isn't enough to survive in Hollywood when you're no longer the underdog. So when Chris Rock dropped that line, it was the match to a very dry forest. Because behind the velvet curtains, inside the after-party lounges, and across 100 DMs from one publicist to another, the real question started to spread. Was this the moment Meghan Markle finally lost the room? But what came next, no one saw coming. A whisper from an A-lister. A smirk caught on camera. A statement crafted with surgical precision. And a Hollywood cold shoulder that might just be permanent. What does it look like when someone walks into a room knowing they don't belong, yet pretending they own it? That was Meghan Markle at the 2025 Gotham Film Awards. And trust me, you could feel it before she even took her first step onto the carpet. The cameras knew. The publicists knew. The stylists, the handlers, the assistants on headsets whispering, "She's here," like they were announcing a weather warning. They all knew. She was dressed like a woman who wanted to make a statement. Emerald satin, strapless, cut perfectly at the waist. Subtle sparkle along the hem. Hair parted in a classic center wave, effortlessly glossy. Everything down to her heel height screamed, "Notice me." Or maybe more accurately, "Don't you dare look away." And for a second, it worked. Flashbulbs erupted. Media coverage that had previously been focused on auteurs and indie darlings now swerved like a car drifting into the wrong lane. Instagram accounts live-streamed her arrival. Gotham Duchess, one caption read. "She's so back," another claimed. But was she? Because if you watch the footage carefully, not the edited clips sent to Access Hollywood, but the raw crowd footage, you'd notice something else. Not awe, not excitement, but tension. And not just any tension. Performative tension. The kind where people smile without their eyes. Where they turn to greet you, and then subtly shift their body angle, away. Where they pose for a photo, but you can practically feel them praying you won't post it. This wasn't admiration. It was obligation. Now let's paint the full picture. Meghan was not nominated for anything. She was not presenting. She was not being honored. She was simply attending. And that, in itself, raised questions. Why was she there? Was it strategic? A last-minute PR push? A favor called in? A distraction from recent headlines? Because recent headlines, if you recall, haven't been kind. From the disastrous, as ever, brand rollout and the subsequent social media backlash, to whispers of a second Netflix project being quietly shelved, to those persistent stories about tension between her and high-profile acquaintances like Victoria Beckham and even Tyler Perry, Meghan's 2025 has been less comeback, more collision course. But Gotham was supposed to be different. A reinvention, a reentry, a recalibration. This was a room full of powerful tastemakers, directors, critics, studio execs, Oscar nominees. Not the splashy red carpet of the Met Gala or the overproduced circus of the Emmys. This was where serious Hollywood gathered. And Meghan? She inserted herself right into the middle of it. Now let's talk about the carpet moment. Because there's footage, unfiltered, shaky, taken from the side, of Meghan walking into the venue. She's smiling. Always smiling. That regal smile. Not too wide. Just enough. Perfect for headlines. Perfect for Getty Images. But look closer. A few feet behind her, Kate Blanchett and Todd Haynes, deep in conversation, seemingly oblivious. To her right, a clutch of producers pretending not to stare. To her left, a reporter lowers their mic mid-interview to glance sideways, then awkwardly resumes. There's an energy to it, an unease. Like the room knew this wasn't just another celebrity walking in. It was a moment, a flashpoint, a test. Would Meghan be embraced by the indie elite? Would she finally break through that invisible ceiling between famous and respected? Or would this be yet another night where the smile faded once the cameras stopped rolling? Now let's talk reactions. Not from fans, from the industry. Multiple journalists later commented that Meghan's team had pushed aggressively for her inclusion at Gotham. She wasn't on the original invite list. Her attendance was confirmed late, some say very late. Whispers of seat shifting echoed through the venue hours before the show began. And then there was the seating chart controversy. Originally seated closer to the front, Meghan was allegedly moved 2 rows back after a last-minute change. The reason? Accommodating a newly confirmed Oscar-winning director. Sure, but insiders say otherwise, that it was less about logistics and more about optics. A handful of honorees reportedly voiced discomfort about being seated near her. One source bluntly put it, "It's not about drama. It's about distraction." Meghan doesn't come quietly. And that, right there, is the contradiction that defines her public life. She wants the spotlight, but without scrutiny. She wants to be part of the conversation, without being the punchline. She wants Hollywood love, without Hollywood criticism. But here's the problem. In this room, clout doesn't come from royal titles. It comes from work, from scripts, from sets, from sweat-stained call sheets at 3 a.m. Meghan didn't arrive with a project. She arrived with a presence. And in a space built around art, presence alone is not enough. Now, pause for a second. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a room where everyone is watching someone, but no one wants to admit it? That was Meghan at Gotham. A walking paradox. People watched her, so they could say they didn't. They tracked her movements, where she stood, who she hugged, how long she stayed in the bathroom. And yet no one approached. Not naturally, anyway. There were no spontaneous conversations with directors. No side huddles with screenwriters. No, we should collaborate. Selfies with rising stars. Just stiff smiles. Stage-managed greetings. And that brings us to one moment. One flash of something real. Right before the main program started, Meghan was seen near the entrance of the VIP cocktail area. A reporter, not a tabloid one, but a respected critic, attempted to ask her about her rumored upcoming documentary project. Her response? A pause, a smile, and then she turned and walked away. Not rude, not aggressive, just gone. But here's the twist. Just behind her, 2 women watched the interaction. One was a famous costume designer. The other? A recent Oscar-nominated producer. They whispered, then laughed, and then one of them said, clearly enough for someone nearby to hear, "She really thinks she's untouchable, doesn't she?" Brutal, but telling, because behind the glitz, the gowns, and the glamour, the real Gotham was happening in side eyes, whispers, and one very particular walk across the carpet. And Meghan didn't see who had just arrived behind her. Someone who had absolutely seen her. Someone who was already watching the crowd's reaction. And someone who had a microphone waiting for him. What happens when the funniest man in the room stops caring about approval? You get truth. You get fire. You get Chris Rock. And in 2025, Chris Rock isn't just telling jokes anymore. He's burning down facades. Especially the ones built on PR spin, curated victimhood, and Hollywood double standards. By the time he stepped onto the Gotham Film Awards stage, Chris wasn't just a comedian. He was a cultural scalpel. And he was about to make Meghan Markle his next incision. But before we get to that moment, the one that blew up Twitter, triggered headlines, and sent Meghan's lawyers into crisis mode, we need to understand where Chris Rock was mentally, professionally, and emotionally. Because this wasn't a random jab. It was a pressure release. A moment years in the making. Let's rewind to the Oscars. Yes, that Oscars. The slap heard round the world. Will Smith. Open hand. Live television. Millions watching. Chris didn't fight back. Didn't break down. Didn't retaliate. He just stood there. Stunned. Composed. Silent. But that silence, It wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Because while Will Smith imploded publicly, issuing apologies, losing deals, becoming a meme, Chris Rock did something far more dangerous. He got quiet. And then he got ready. In the months that followed, Chris didn't do a media tour. He didn't sue. He didn't cry on cue. He got on stage. And when he finally spoke, in his Netflix Live special Selective Outrage, he didn't just break his silence. He obliterated it. He turned personal pain into comedic gold. And in doing so, he claimed something rare in modern entertainment: moral authority. Audiences didn't just laugh. They listened. Because here was a man who had been physically assaulted on the world's biggest stage, and instead of playing victim, he sharpened his wit. And people loved him for it. Suddenly, Chris Rock wasn't just funny. He was feared. And for good reason. Because when Chris Rock sets his sights on you, there's no defense. He doesn't rant. He dissects. He doesn't scream. He smirks. He doesn't cancel. He exposes. By 2025, Chris was everywhere, but not in the way most celebrities are. He wasn't pushing products. He wasn't launching a skincare line. He wasn't giving soft-focus interviews about healing. He was headlining sold-out theaters, writing, hosting, popping up at award shows not to flatter Hollywood, but to roast it alive. And he'd become particularly dangerous to one specific kind of public figure: the ones who wear their victimhood like armor, the ones who demand applause and sympathy, the ones who rewrite narratives, then punish anyone who asks uncomfortable questions. Sound familiar? So let's zoom in on the Gotham Film Awards. Chris Rock wasn't the host that night. He wasn't there for a grand tour. He wasn't angling for another special. He was there to present a mid-show tribute, 3 minutes, max. But with Chris Rock, 3 minutes is a lifetime. And this was his kind of room. Not network television. No commercial breaks. No censorship. Just filmmakers, critics, and actors, many of whom despise Meghan Markle's tabloid circus but are too polite to say it out loud. Chris? He's not polite anymore. And he hadn't forgotten. Not the social media pile-ons. Not the think pieces calling him problematic. Not the whispers about how comedy needs to be more sensitive. He had watched as celebrities rebranded themselves as survivors of trauma every time they received criticism. He had watched as powerful people weaponized identity to deflect accountability. And at the center of that trend, front and center, was Meghan Markle. Let's not kid ourselves. Chris had clocked her years ago. He joked about her before the Gotham incident, calling her out in stand-up for claiming the royal family was shocked that a baby might be brown. Chris's words? That's what the royal family is supposed to do. They're the OGs of racism. He laughed. The audience laughed. The internet exploded. And Meghan's team? Radio silence. They knew better than to mess with Chris Rock. Until Gotham. Because when he saw her name on the guest list that night, when he saw she was walking the carpet like a nominee, something in him snapped. Not in anger. Not in hatred. In resolve. This wasn't going to be another soft moment. Another celebrity celebrating celebrity speech. This was going to be a reminder that in a room full of actors, he was the only one still telling the truth. Let's talk about how he looked. Crisp black suit. No tie. Slightly unshaven, like he'd been too busy writing jokes to groom. When he took the stage, he smiled, but not wide. He didn't stride. He sauntered. He adjusted the mic like it was a weapon. The applause was polite, reserved, unsure, because everyone in that room knew. Chris Rock doesn't do safe anymore. And Meghan? She was seated just 5 rows back, smiling, clapping, but her smile faded fast. Chris started light. Jokes about indie film budgets. Quips about A24's obsession with trauma. A solid line about Adam Driver being a walking art house NFT. The crowd laughed. He let them laugh. Then, the pivot. He paused, scanned the room, looked straight toward Meghan's section, and said, "You ever notice how some people come to award shows without a movie, a script, a nomination, but still manage to be the star?" Laughter. Nervous. Confused. Then he added, "I'm not saying names, but if you're here with no film and a royal title, you might be the yacht B asterisk TCH in the room." Boom. The room stopped. You could feel it. Like oxygen got sucked out of the building. And Chris? He didn't flinch. He didn't smirk. Didn't laugh. Didn't soften. He just kept going. Because that wasn't the punchline. That was the introduction. He went deeper. Talked about how Hollywood has a Meghan problem. How celebrity victimhood has replaced storytelling. How people with no credits are taking up all the cultural bandwidth. How the real artists, the ones bleeding for their craft, are getting sidelined by PR-trained influencers with entitlement issues. It was savage. It was clinical. It was vintage Chris Rock. And it left the room rattled. Some laughed. Loudly. Others clapped. Quietly. A few A-listers looked straight down. But not Meghan. She didn't look away. She didn't blink. And that's what made it even more intense. Two icons. One stage. No scripts. Because in that moment, Meghan Markle wasn't a duchess. She wasn't an actress. She wasn't an activist. She was a target. And Chris Rock, he wasn't holding back. Not for royalty. Not for reputation. Not for anything. Because when you've already been slapped in front of the world, what's left to fear? Nothing. Chris Rock had nothing left to lose. But what he gained that night was something Meghan's team never saw coming. And what happened next, backstage, behind the velvet curtain, would rip the room in two. Because while Meghan sat frozen in place, others were laughing. And not just laughing, agreeing. Was it a joke or a sniper shot? That was the question reverberating across the room, through social media, and behind closed studio doors just moments after Chris Rock dropped his now infamous Yappy *TCH line. Because on the surface, it looked casual. A typical award show bit. 3 minutes. A few quips. Some light jabs at Hollywood tropes. A toast to the nominees. Cue the orchestra. Move along. But if you were paying attention, really paying attention, you saw it for what it was. A setup, carefully engineered. Disguised as comedy. Disarmed with charm. And then, boom, one line hit like a cruise missile. And the target? Not just Meghan Markle. The idea of Meghan Markle. Let's break it down. Chris Rock walked on stage to deliver a tribute, not a roast. The audience was expecting playful commentary, not cultural warfare. He started with crowd pleasers. Observations about budget constraints in indie films. A jab at the prestige obsession with generational trauma stories. A sarcastic shout-out to the gritty realism of a $5 million movie made entirely in a Brooklyn laundromat. People laughed, relaxed, dropped their guard. Exactly what Chris wanted. And then he pivoted, so smoothly, most didn't catch it until it was too late. It's funny, right? In a room like this, real artists, real filmmakers, you still got folks who show up with no script, no reel, no Oscar, not even a YouTube short. But somehow, they're still headlining the headlines. Cue polite laughter. It's abstract enough. Could be anyone, right? Wrong. Chris's eyes never left one corner of the room. The one where Meghan Markle sat, back rigid, smile frozen. Then he twisted the knife. I'm just saying, if you come to an indie film awards show with no film, you might just be the Yappy *TCH in the room. Dead silence. Then gasps. A couple sharp inhales. And a few snorts from the corners. People too shocked not to laugh. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't coded. It was direct. Lethal. And perfectly timed. Now here's the twist. Chris didn't name her. That's the brilliance. That's the trap. He built the perfect, plausible deniability defense. He didn't say her name. Didn't point. Didn't quote a headline or use a tabloid screenshot. He let the audience do the math. And they did. Instantly. Because there was only one person in that room who checked every box. No film. No nomination. No artistic connection to the event. But making headlines anyway. And when he said the words, Yappy *TCH, it wasn't just about Meghan's physical presence. It was about the digital mythology that has surrounded her for years. The whispered rumors. The unverified yacht stories. The private events with Middle Eastern billionaires, with unnamed guests and untraceable flights. Always denied. Always dismissed. Always lingering. Chris gave that rumor oxygen. A microphone. A punchline. And in doing so, he brought the internet's dirtiest theories to the center of a black tie awards show. So the question becomes, was it deliberate? Let's look at the evidence. First, Chris didn't have to go off script. He was given pre-cleared remarks. The producers had worked with his team on a short speech. Light banter, thank the presenters, maybe toss in a joke about A24 overusing sad piano music. Second, insiders say Chris rewrote his own intro backstage. One source from the event production team claimed he asked for the mic setup to be moved back slightly so he could work the space. That's not something you do if you're just reading off a teleprompter. Another source added. He had a notepad with scribbles and names. He was editing lines minutes before going live. So no, this wasn't off the cuff. This wasn't spontaneous. This was a surgical strike. A line designed to cut, crafted to leave just enough ambiguity to escape censure, but sharp enough to draw blood. Why now? Why Meghan? Why this room? Let's answer that. Meghan Markle's presence at the Gotham Film Awards wasn't just unnecessary, it was disruptive. This wasn't a mainstream awards show with fluff segments and PR-driven nominations. This was a room full of people who work in the trenches of cinema, who sacrifice big paychecks for artistic freedom, who pour themselves into stories that rarely reach more than a few art house theaters and limited Oscar runs. To them, Meghan represented the opposite of that. Not struggle, not story, not art, just spectacle. She walked in like she belonged. Chris made sure she knew she didn't. And here's the emotional core of this chapter. Chris Rock used comedy to defend something sacred: authenticity. He saw an industry being slowly infected by influencers masquerading as artists, by curated tragedy disguised as creative depth, by celebrity without craft. And he struck back. Now, let's address the contradiction. Isn't comedy supposed to punch up? Isn't Meghan, in some ways, a victim? A biracial woman married into an ancient, racist institution. A woman chased by tabloids. A mother. A philanthropist. Sure, but that's the version she markets. Chris challenged a different version. The version who trades trauma for attention. Who claims privacy while filming documentaries. Who publishes love letters to humanity while quietly trademarking luxury goods. Who speaks truth to power. Until the questions get too specific. That version? Fair game. And here's the most chilling part of the monologue. Chris didn't smile during the joke. He didn't crack up, didn't chuckle, didn't pause for laughs. He said it, let it sit, and moved on. No punchline, just a punch. Which is why people started asking, was that even a joke? Or was it an ambush? Some insiders believe Chris was making a broader point, satirizing the culture of celebrity entitlement. Others think it was personal. That behind the scenes, Chris has long resented the way Meghan Markle has manipulated public perception and weaponized identity to dodge critique. Some say he reached a breaking point. Others say he was just being himself, fearless, boundary-pushing, and brilliant. But here's the undeniable truth. The moment he said it, the energy in the room changed. Every smile tightened, every glance sharpened, every laugh died a little quicker. And Meghan? She didn't walk out. She didn't cry. She didn't retaliate on site. She sat, stone-faced, emotionless, processing, because she knew, in that moment, that something irreversible had happened. A line had been crossed, not just by Chris, but by the room. And that's the part no one's talking about. The moment after the joke. The reaction. Because what came next revealed more than the joke ever could. What did he really say? Because in a viral moment like this, when clips are sliced, headlines are spun, and algorithms throttle context, the truth becomes slippery. But let's be clear about something right now. Chris Rock didn't stutter. He didn't mumble. He didn't allegedly say anything. He said it. Loud. Clear. On record. And what he said detonated like a grenade in slow motion. But to understand the true impact, we have to reconstruct the moment exactly as it happened. Not the versions filtered through TikTok edits or reaction videos. Not the distorted sound bites twisted into headlines. But the full quote. In context. Uncut. Because once you hear the full line, not just the trigger words, but the framing around it, you'll understand why this wasn't just a roast. It was a cultural hand grenade. Let's roll the tape. Chris, already 2 minutes into his monologue, had just finished skewering Hollywood's obsession with trauma porn. Nowadays, if your movie doesn't have someone crying in a basement in slow motion to a sad jazz soundtrack, it can't win awards. Where are the fun films, man? Laughter. A few claps. Some knowing nods from directors in the front row. Then, he pivoted. But hey, not everyone needs a movie to get attention these days. Some folks walk into a film awards show with no film, no nomination, no resume, and still get more coverage than half the nominees. A few awkward laughs. Someone in the back whispered, "Is he talking about her?" And then came the kill shot. You know, Meghan's been on more yachts than champagne. She didn't marry a prince, she upgraded her client. The room froze. Not silence, Stillness. Like everyone's soul hit pause. Because in those two lines, Chris didn't just imply something scandalous. He summoned it. He invoked a shadow narrative that has clung to Meghan Markle's name like perfume no one admits they smell, but everyone knows is there. And he said it in front of everyone. Producers, directors, Academy voters, studio executives. Not on a blog, not on a message board, not on some fringe podcast, but on a stage, in a tuxedo, with a mic, at one of Hollywood's most respected industry events. It wasn't vague. It wasn't metaphorical. It was surgical. Let's deconstruct it piece by piece. You know, Meghan's been on more yachts than champagne. That's not just a jab at luxury. That's coded language. It refers to years of rumors circulating in the darker corners of tabloid media and anonymous gossip forums that Meghan was once part of a world of ultra-exclusive yacht girls. A world where beautiful women are allegedly flown to luxury destinations by the ultra-rich for company, companionship, and, depending on who you ask, more transactional arrangements. Now, let's be clear. Meghan has never confirmed, acknowledged, or directly responded to these rumors. In fact, any major outlet that publishes them gets swiftly hit with legal threats. But the whispers remain. And in Hollywood, whispers matter. Especially when someone like Chris Rock decides to give them a microphone. Then came the second line. She didn't marry a prince, she upgraded her client. This is where the room really tensed. Because that line, it wasn't just shade. It was allegation. It turned the love story of Meghan and Harry, the fairy tale, the royal saga, the global romance, into a transaction. It reframed her marriage not as destiny, not as serendipity, not even as rebellion, but as strategy. It suggested that Prince Harry wasn't her soulmate. He was her exit plan. From what? From irrelevance. From mid-tier TV roles. From a career that, according to some, had already plateaued before Suits even ended. That line reduced the royal wedding to a rebrand. It said the quiet part out loud. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because no one in that room believed Chris was joking. Not really. Not deep down. They laughed because they were shocked. Because it was taboo. Because it was a relief to finally hear someone say what so many had only dared to whisper. But not everyone laughed. Some looked down at their shoes. Others gave tight-lipped smiles. One indie actress was seen mouthing, "Oh my God," and covering her face. And Meghan? She didn't move. Didn't fidget. Didn't whisper to her assistant. Didn't glance around the room for support. She simply froze. Cameras didn't catch it fully, but a few lucky seats nearby did. Her hand tightened around her clutch. Her jaw clenched ever so slightly. One witness said, "It was like watching a porcelain doll crack from the inside." Because this moment wasn't just humiliating. It was strategic exposure. Chris didn't rant. He didn't monologue. He dropped the line and moved on. Let it hang there. No apology. No walking it back. No softening the impact. Because that was the plan all along. Say the one thing no one else would say, and then walk away clean. And here's the thing. There was no censorship. No bleeps. No delay. It went out live. Millions of people watching online. Live streams. Live tweets. Instagram reels. TikToks. Within 30 minutes, the quote was everywhere. Trending in 15 countries. Pulled into headlines across the UK, the US, Australia. Hashtag Yachtgate exploded on social media. Chris Rock memes filled Twitter. Meghan Markle fans erupted in outrage, demanding apologies, lawsuits, cancellations. But the other side? The anti-Meghan crowd? They were celebrating. Finally, someone had said it. Finally, someone had pulled the thread. And what came next was even more brutal than the joke itself. The analysis. Clips were slowed down. Body language experts weighed in. Lip readers speculated about what Meghan muttered under her breath. Journalists dove into past yacht rumors. Compiled old photos. Rehashed timelines. And suddenly, the focus wasn't on the Gotham Film Awards. It wasn't on the films, the nominees, the indie triumphs. It was on her. Again. For all the wrong reasons. And Chris? He didn't tweet. Didn't post. Didn't explain. He just disappeared backstage. No statement. No clarification. He knew exactly what he did. And exactly why. Because while the internet argued about whether the line was misogynistic, or cruel, or inappropriate, they missed the bigger point. It worked. He shattered the image. He popped the balloon. And in Hollywood, A town obsessed with image. That's the ultimate power move. But what no one realized yet was that this wasn't the end. Not even close. Because backstage, two of the most powerful women in entertainment were already talking. Not about the joke, not about the damage, but about what they'd seen in that room. About who laughed, about who stayed silent, and about what Meghan's face really said in those frozen seconds. Because what came next wasn't another punchline. It was the real drama, and it wasn't going to stay behind closed doors for long. If you want to know what really happened after Chris Rock dropped the yappy *TCH bomb, don't look at the stage. Look behind it. Because while the cameras stayed glued to Chris, capturing every biting syllable and shocked audience reaction, the real fallout was already beginning backstage, where whispers turned into warnings, where side eyes became statements, and where two of Hollywood's most influential women shared a look that said everything. Victoria Beckham and Cate Blanchett. On the surface, they couldn't be more different. One, a fashion icon and former Spice Girl turned luxury designer and social power broker. The other, a two-time Academy Award-winning actress with the gravitas of Meryl Streep and the edge of Tilda Swinton. But what they do share: access, influence, and immunity. They don't need to tweet. They don't need to post thoughts on Instagram. When these women speak, even in hushed tones, it ripples through every corridor in the industry. And that night, after Chris Rock's mic drop moment, they spoke. Not into microphones. To each other. And what they said, what was overheard, has now become legend. But before we get to that moment, we have to understand the backdrop. Because the relationship between Meghan Markle and Victoria Beckham is complicated. At best, back in 2018, Meghan and Harry reportedly grew close to David and Victoria Beckham, two global brands colliding at the intersection of royalty and celebrity. There were double dates, fashion consultations, tabloid speculation that Meghan would become a brand ambassador for Victoria's label. Then came the fallout. Suddenly, Meghan stopped wearing Victoria's clothes. Rumors leaked that Meghan suspected Victoria of leaking stories to the press. David Beckham, furious, confronted Harry in what insiders later described as a cold, tense call that ended with a permanent rift. Since then, silence. No public reconciliation. No brand support. No invites. And on the night of the Gotham Film Awards, Victoria Beckham was seated 2 rows behind Meghan. And she saw everything. Now Cate Blanchett. She's never had a public beef with Meghan. She's far too discreet, too poised. But Blanchett is a revered figure in the indie film world. She's beloved not just for her performances, but for her advocacy for serious cinema, emerging talent, and artistic integrity. And quietly, over the past few years, insiders say Cate has expressed discomfort with Meghan's presence in film spaces, despite having no real film credentials beyond her Suits run and a Netflix deal funded by royal notoriety. To Cate, Meghan isn't talent. She's disruption. And that night, Cate, elegant in a navy Stella McCartney pantsuit, watched Meghan's reaction with quiet precision. No blinking, no smiling, just observing. So when Chris Rock finished his monologue and the house lights dimmed for the next segment, these two women found themselves momentarily alone backstage, shielded from the cameras, but not from the eyes of those nearby. And here's what one source, a production assistant with clear access to the offstage area, later told reporters. Victoria leaned in, shook her head, and said, "She always makes it about her, even when it's not." Cate just nodded and said, "It's exhausting." Then they both sort of smirked. Simple, subtle, but brutal, and revealing. Because this wasn't just gossip. This was two pillars of modern culture quietly acknowledging something many have whispered, but few have dared articulate. That Meghan Markle, in her pursuit of relevance, has become a drain on the very spaces she tries to elevate. And the Whisper Network? It picked up speed. Within an hour, murmurs spread through the VIP cocktail lounge. One award-nominated screenwriter was overheard saying, "I can't believe she sat through that." Then again, she probably thinks it was about another Meghan. Another actor, known for his dry wit, told a friend. Chris said what we've all been thinking since the Oprah interview. And a female director who'd worked on a Sundance-winning film allegedly whispered, "She came here expecting a redemption arc, but this is the third act twist." But here's where it gets really interesting. Because despite all the tension, all the snide remarks, all the performative side eyes, no one approached Meghan. Not to console her. Not to defend her. Not even to pretend. Not a single A-lister was seen leaning in for a hug or sharing a laugh. She was left alone. The room had turned. And that's not just social discomfort. That's strategic disengagement. Hollywood doesn't cut people off with press releases. It does it with eye contact, or the lack of it, with seating arrangements, with who gets looped into projects, with who doesn't get the call back. And Meghan? She was visibly isolated. Not just physically, symbolically. Even the people who might have once championed her, activists, progressive actors, diversity advocates, stayed silent. Because when Chris Rock delivered his punchline, he didn't just question Meghan's past. He challenged her present. He suggested that the very foundation of her image, the mix of victimhood, ambition, and curated compassion, was built on something false. And in that room, at that moment, the silence spoke volumes. But back to Victoria and Kate. Because while their brief exchange wasn't captured on camera, their body language was. Photos from backstage show the two women smiling at each other. A private, knowing smile. One that says, "We've seen this movie before." One that says, "We know what she's doing." And perhaps most chillingly, "We're done pretending." This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was consensus. And consensus is deadly, especially in an industry where perception is currency. Because when those women stop defending you, when they begin to quietly smirk instead of publicly support, the clock starts ticking. Your invites start disappearing. Your phone stops ringing. Your name gets mentioned less in boardrooms and more in punchlines. And Meghan? She didn't just lose control of the narrative. She lost the room. But what she didn't know yet was that someone very close to her was about to speak. And when he did, it would make everything so much worse. Every industry has its unspoken truths. The things everyone knows. Everyone discusses in private. But no one says aloud. Until someone like Chris Rock gets a mic. And the room goes quiet. Because what he triggered with one line, "She's been on more yachts than champagne," wasn't just a joke. It was an invocation. A summoning of one of the most persistent, toxic, and damning rumors ever attached to Meghan Markle's name. And in that moment, a centuries-old institution and a billion-dollar Hollywood PR machine both cracked under a single, whispered phrase. Yacht girl. Now let's be very clear. This chapter isn't about endorsing gossip. It's about explaining the cultural weight of what Chris Rock dared to say. Because he didn't just insult Meghan. He activated a dormant narrative. One that's lived in private DMs, deleted Reddit threads, and burner Twitter accounts. A story too dangerous for mainstream media, too salacious for fact-checkers, too slippery for lawyers. But never forgotten. So what is the yacht girl rumor? Where did it begin? Why has it haunted Meghan for years? And why, despite legal threats and official denials, won't it go away? Let's dive in. The term, yacht girl, is industry slang. It refers to a shadowy world where models, actresses, and influencers, often still on the rise, often still anonymous, are allegedly flown to elite parties on luxury yachts, frequently in Europe or the Middle East, hosted by billionaires, oligarchs, or royal families. The claim? That these women are compensated not just for their presence, but for their discretion. Sometimes it's social. Sometimes it's transactional. Always exclusive. Always off-grid. Photos are banned. Phones are confiscated. NDAs are signed. Arrivals are staggered. Departures are staggered further. It's the stuff of conspiracy theories. But it's also an open secret in modeling, fashion, and yes, Hollywood. And for years, Meghan Markle's name has floated, again and again, on anonymous tip lists tied to this scene. The rumors claim she appeared at multiple private luxury events between 2011 and 2015, often in Ibiza, Mykonos, and Cannes. Details are always vague, always just out of reach. A blurry photo, a redacted guest list, a name mentioned in a now-deleted post. No concrete proof, but just enough smoke to make people wonder if there was ever a fire. Now, important pause here. Meghan has never admitted to any of this. Her defenders call the rumors misogynistic, racist, jealous attacks from people who can't stomach a woman of color ascending to royalty. And to be fair, that's not entirely wrong. The yacht girl label has been weaponized against dozens of women, often unfairly, often viciously. But here's where things get complicated. In Meghan's case, the rumors didn't emerge after her marriage to Prince Harry. They existed before that. Way before. They were already in circulation during her Suits days. In online forums. Among stylists. In modeling agencies. And they followed her. So when she married into the British royal family, those whispers didn't disappear. They amplified. The idea of a yacht girl turned duchess became internet gold. The fairy tale flipped. The American dream rebranded as a calculation. And the more she polished her image, the Vogue covers, the philanthropy, the TED Talks, the more some people clung to that old, dirty rumor. Why? Because it represents everything Hollywood loves to hate. The idea that success isn't earned. It's bought. That fame isn't about merit. It's about access. And Meghan? In the eyes of her critics, she personifies that. So when Chris Rock dropped the yacht line, he wasn't just taking a jab. He was flipping the table. He dared to say, what if the fairy tale is fake? And in that moment, Meghan's entire brand, compassionate rebel, victim of oppression, survivor of palace cruelty, was cast in a different light. Because if even a sliver of the yacht rumors were true, if there was a past she scrubbed, a story she rewrote, a chapter she buried, then what else had been fabricated? What else had been staged? What else had been, dare we say it, manipulated? That's the danger. Not the rumor itself, but what it suggests. And here's the kicker. After Chris's joke, Meghan's team didn't issue a denial. No, these rumors are false. No, we're disgusted by the misogyny. No cease and desist. Just silence. A carefully worded, vague statement that we'll unpack in the next chapter. But for now, let's focus on the industry reaction. Because this wasn't just gossip fodder. This became conversation currency. Publicists whispered about it in SUVs. Executives texted each other during the after-party. Female producers side-eyed Meghan as they passed her at the bar. And perhaps most damning of all, a source from a major studio allegedly told a journalist, "We were close to circling back with her on a docuseries pitch. After that joke, we're letting it cool. Way down." That's the fallout. Not headlines. Not hashtags. Access. Gone. Because in Hollywood, reputation is everything. And no matter how unconfirmed a rumor is, once it's been said out loud by someone like Chris Rock, it sticks. Forever. And let's not pretend Meghan doesn't know that. She built her entire brand on image management. Every photo curated. Every interview choreographed. Every public statement stripped of spontaneity. But this she didn't control. This she couldn't spin. And what makes it worse? The joke worked. Because people laughed. Not all of them. Not loudly. Not for long. But enough of them. Enough to let her know that the Whisper Network wasn't just surviving. It was flourishing. And Chris? He didn't flinch. Because he knew, just like the rest of Hollywood knows, that the yacht girl narrative is more than a rumor. It's a test. A test of credibility. A test of authenticity. A test of power. And in that moment, Meghan failed. Not because it was true, but because she had no answer. She didn't walk out. Didn't clap back. Didn't defend herself. She just froze. Because when someone finally says the thing you've spent your entire career outrunning, there's no good reaction. Only exposure. In the room, it was watching. Not just Chris. Not just Meghan. But everyone. And someone else, someone very familiar to Meghan, was watching too. And when he gave his reaction, it changed everything. 3 men. 3 reactions. 1 viral backstage video. In the chaos after Chris Rock's Gotham mic drop, everyone wanted to know. Who laughed? Who flinched? Who looked away? Because in a scandal like this, silence is loud, but reactions? Reactions are seismic. And of all the stunned expressions, sideways glances, and nervous chuckles caught on tape, 3 stood out above the rest. Trevor Noah, Michael B. Jordan, and one Hollywood heavyweight whose smirk was more revealing than any press statement Meghan Markle's team could draft. Let's break it down. Because what these 3 men did, or didn't do, in those 5 seconds following Chris Rock's #TCH line said more than any op-ed, tweet, or tabloid ever could. First up, Trevor Noah. The cameras caught him mid-breath. Chris was halfway through the setup when the feed cut to Trevor in the audience, smiling, nodding, enjoying the show. But when the punchline hit, his smile evaporated. He froze, jaw clenched, eyes wide. A microsecond of processing, then immediate discomfort. Lip readers later suggested he whispered, "No way," under his breath. Others claimed he mouthed, "Oh damn," But the expression? Unmistakable. Shock, awareness, and restraint. Trevor Noah is no stranger to navigating cultural landmines. His career has been built on walking the tightrope of truth and diplomacy. He understands racial politics, gender tension, class divides. He also understands Meghan. They've been publicly friendly. He's defended her in interviews. He's supported her right to speak out. When the Sussex's Netflix doc dropped, Trevor praised it for unpacking centuries of power dynamics. But that night, he didn't defend her. He didn't clap. He didn't laugh. He just froze, and then looked away. A calculated choice. Because Trevor Noah, media trained to the bone, knew this moment would be scrutinized. He knew any smirk, any visible discomfort, any second of visible judgment would be screen-grabbed, GIF'd, and dissected for days. So he chose the safest route, emotional neutrality. But in a room full of Hollywood elites, that neutrality read like a verdict. Now let's talk about Michael B. Jordan. Because his reaction? The opposite. At first, he didn't react at all. But then, he did something unexpected. He chuckled. Not a full belly laugh. Not a roaring cackle. Just a quick, sharp exhale. A smirk. A barely contained laugh. And he immediately covered it with a sip of water. But the damage was done. The clip went viral. Twitter ran wild. Michael B. Jordan's face when Chris Rock said the yacht thing. I'm screaming. The way MBJ couldn't even pretend to care. Hollywood men are done pretending with Meghan. That's the I've heard worse laugh. And here's the kicker. This wasn't random. Michael B. Jordan and Meghan Markle have history. Not scandalous, but telling. Back in the early 2010s, they were on the same circuit. Rising stars, red carpet newbies, hustling their way through mid-budget network gigs. They shared a few panels. Mutual acquaintances. A short-lived modeling agency crossover. There were rumors, never confirmed, that Meghan had once tried to arrange a casual coffee with MBJ through a mutual agent. Allegedly, he declined. Years later, when she married Harry and the world exploded with royal frenzy, Michael was asked in an interview about Meghan. He smiled politely. I'm happy for her. She's doing her thing. Polite, generic, distant. And that distance? It remained. So when Chris Rock turned her into a punchline, Michael's reaction wasn't confusion. It wasn't horror. It was recognition. Like someone who'd seen the private side of the PR machine and decided, yeah, this tracks. He wasn't mocking. He was confirming. And in doing so, he aligned, subtly, but powerfully, with a growing undercurrent in Hollywood. That the Meghan Markle mystique has worn thin. That the royal glow-up no longer blinds those in the know. And perhaps most powerfully of all, that some of Hollywood's most respected black men are no longer protecting her. That's the twist. Because for years, Meghan has leaned into racial identity politics as a shield against criticism, and often, justifiably so. The UK press? Vicious, racist, unforgiving. But in Hollywood, where race is understood in layered nuance, where identity is embraced, not demonized, the Meghan narrative has lost its edge. Because when you weaponize trauma as brand equity, then surround yourself with billionaires and $1,400 skin cream, it raises eyebrows. Especially among those who've actually lived the struggle. Trevor Noah saw it. Michael B. Jordan smirked at it. But the most damning reaction was from someone not even seated near Meghan. Someone whose face broke the internet. A-list director. Industry icon. Name redacted, at least for now. This third man wasn't caught during the live broadcast. He was caught in backstage footage, an iPhone video, grainy and shaky, leaked just 12 hours later. In the clip, Chris Rock walks past him. They lock eyes. And this director, Oscar winner, Ken Darling, known for scathing satire and quiet brilliance, leans in and simply says, "About damn time." Just 3 words. But explosive, because it revealed what many now believe. That the joke wasn't a betrayal of Hollywood's progressive values. It was a release. A collective exhale from those tired of playing along. Tired of pretending Meghan Markle was something she's not. An auteur. A producer. A cultural icon. To them, she's just another actor who lost the plot. And Chris Rock, he brought the curtain down. But this reaction divide, the smirks, the silences, the carefully averted eyes, it split Hollywood in half. One half, still loyal, still publicly defending, still insisting the joke was misogynistic, harmful, unfair. The other half, done pretending. And this divide spilled onto social media. Hashtag Team Meghan versus hashtag Team Chris. Instagram stories exploded. Fan pages clashed. PR agents scrambled. Think pieces flooded Substack. Some called it comedy. Some called it character assassination. Some called it truth-telling. But beneath the noise, one truth emerged. Chris Rock changed the tone of the conversation. Not just about Meghan, but about how Hollywood polices its own hypocrisy. And Trevor Noah? He still hasn't commented. Michael B. Jordan? Still silent. But the footage exists. Their faces tell the story. And the world is watching. Waiting. Because if those men won't protect Meghan anymore, who will? And just as that question started trending, Meghan's team issued a statement. But it wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was something far more dangerous. Calculated. What happens when the funniest man in the room stops caring about approval? You get truth. You get fire. You get Chris Rock. And in 2025, Chris Rock isn't just telling jokes anymore. He's burning down facades, especially the ones built on PR spin, curated victimhood, and Hollywood double standards. By the time he stepped onto the Gotham Film Awards stage, Chris wasn't just a comedian. He was a cultural scalpel, and he was about to make Meghan Markle his next incision. But before we get to that moment, the one that blew up Twitter, triggered headlines, and sent Meghan's lawyers into crisis mode, we need to understand where Chris Rock was mentally, professionally, and emotionally. Because this wasn't a random jab. It was a pressure release. A moment years in the making. Let's rewind to the Oscars. Yes, that Oscars. The slap heard round the world. Will Smith. Open hand. Live television. Millions watching. Chris didn't fight back. Didn't break down. Didn't retaliate. He just stood there. Stunned. Composed. Silent. But that silence, it wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Because while Will Smith imploded publicly, issuing apologies, losing deals, becoming a meme, Chris Rock did something far more dangerous. He got quiet. And then he got ready. In the months that followed, Chris didn't do a media tour. He didn't sue. He didn't cry on cue. He got on stage. And when he finally spoke, in his Netflix Live special Selective Outrage, he didn't just break his silence. He obliterated it. He turned personal pain into comedic gold. And in doing so, he claimed something rare in modern entertainment. Moral authority. Audiences didn't just laugh. They listened. Because here was a man who had been physically assaulted on the world's biggest stage, and instead of playing victim, he sharpened his wit. And people loved him for it. Suddenly, Chris Rock wasn't just funny. He was feared. And for good reason. Because when Chris Rock sets his sights on you, there's no defense. He doesn't rant. He dissects. He doesn't scream. He smirks. He doesn't cancel. He exposes. By 2025, Chris was everywhere, but not in the way most celebrities are. He wasn't pushing products. He wasn't launching a skincare line. He wasn't giving soft-focus interviews about healing. He was headlining sold-out theaters. Writing. Hosting. Popping up at award shows not to flatter Hollywood, but to roast it alive. And he'd become particularly dangerous to one specific kind of public figure. The ones who wear their victimhood like armor. The ones who demand applause and sympathy. The ones who rewrite narratives, then punish anyone who asks uncomfortable questions. Sound familiar? So let's zoom in on the Gotham Film Awards. Chris Rock wasn't the host that night. He wasn't there for a grand tour. He wasn't angling for another special. He was there to present a mid-show tribute, 3 minutes, max. But with Chris Rock, 3 minutes is a lifetime. And this was his kind of room. Not network television. No commercial breaks. No censorship. Just filmmakers, critics, and actors, many of whom despise Meghan Markle's tabloid circus but are too polite to say it out loud. Chris? He's not polite anymore. And he hadn't forgotten. Not the social media pile-ons. Not the think pieces calling him problematic. Not the whispers about how comedy needs to be more sensitive. He had watched as celebrities rebranded themselves as survivors of trauma every time they received criticism. He had watched as powerful people weaponized identity to deflect accountability. And at the center of that trend, front and center, was Meghan Markle. Let's not kid ourselves. Chris had clocked her years ago. He joked about her before the Gotham incident, calling her out in stand-up for claiming the royal family was shocked that a baby might be brown. Chris's words? That's what the royal family is supposed to do. They're the OGs of racism. He laughed. The audience laughed. The internet exploded. And Meghan's team? Radio silence. They knew better than to mess with Chris Rock. Until Gotham. Because when he saw her name on the guest list that night, when he saw she was walking the carpet like a nominee,